Hey, this is Will Swartstrom.
This is Stefan Bolt.
Hey guys, this is Ernie Howard.
This is M.A. Phipps, and you're listening to
30-minute author interviews
with Preston Lay.
Woohoo!
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. Our guest today is Daniel Arthur Smith. Thank you so much for coming on and taking time out of your day to do 30-minute author interviews.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, Preston. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
I have, too. It's been a long time coming for sure. We've started out with a new segment here that we call Two Truths and a Lie, where you tell me two truths about you and a lie, and I have to guess which one it is. So if you don't mind, do you have two truths and a lie that you can tell us?
Sure. I'm a fiction writer. I have all kinds of mix of this and that. So let's see. So I was out of my parents' house at a very young age, just around 12 years old. I have been involved in theater in my younger life and was a star in an off-Broadway production in New York. And I went from high school to college without a diploma or a GED. And that's three, right?
That's three.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And one of those is a lie. Man. I'm trying to think now from everything I've seen you post online, because we've been friends for a while online, and none of those are ringing a bell.
Oh, really?
Oh, man. For some reason, I think you have done off Broadway. For some reason, I'm thinking that. So it's the going from high school to college without a diploma or leaving your house at a young age. For some reason, I'm going to say that going from high school to college without a degree is the lie.
That is actually a truth.
Is it really?
Yeah, I went from high school and I tested into advanced level coursework at a local college. And then from there, I went to the university. And at the university, I went into a master's program before I finished my bachelor's program. So I was the first person in the history of my program to be dual enrolled as both an undergrad and a graduate student.
Oh, wow. So what was the lie?
I did not star in an off-Broadway production in New York.
Oh.
I have been involved in theater, though. When I was in school, I was part of community theater. And so I starred in, I don't know what star. I acted in The Tempest, which is a great Shakespeare show. And I acted in the female version of The Odd Couple. And I was the lead in Mousetrap. And yeah, I did a few community theater shows, and I thought I would always do community theater. I thought I would continue that, but somehow I haven't brought that back into my life yet.
You still got time. So for those that might not know who you are or what you do, why don't you kind of tell the audience who you are and what you do?
So my name is Daniel Smith. I write as Daniel Arthur Smith. I am a full-time father, number one. And then after that, a full-time writer. And I write short stories and speculative fiction and novels and a little bit of poetry, but none of that I have published. And then I'm also a futurist and consultant. So that sums that up.
When did you get your love for writing and storytellers? What was it that inspired that?
I won an award, a library award, not, like a child award when I was in, I want to say the third grade. It might have been second or third grade. And it gave me such a great deal of confidence in my writing that I just really embraced it. So by fifth grade, I had written a number of short stories and was working on a novella, which I should say was not an original work. It was a lot of the stuff I was doing, as many artists do, was mimicking existing work, right? So my first larger project was I mimicked H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, particularly with the Morlocks.
Okay.
So I don't know what I was thinking of how I tried to make it my own, right? But looking back, it's like, well, dude, you're just kind of hacking, But I've learned that is a very common thing with artists. Is you start by I wouldn't say it was fan fiction necessarily, because I was trying to make an original story, but it was the same thing I had seen. Really, I was just regurgitating it.
That's funny, because I remember 2 stories I wrote in middle school. They were just awful. One of them was the untrue story of the 3 little pigs, and the 3 little pigs.
I love that.
The pigs got turned into bacon at the end of the book, if I remember right.
I love bacon too.
Yeah.
A win-win.
That's right. So you said you've written poetry, and I did not know that. Do you ever plan on publishing your poetry?
I don't not plan on publishing it. It hasn't been at the forefront. I haven't written as much poetry in the last couple of years because my cycles for writing have been spent on short stories and novels. Mm-hmm. Poetry was what I predominantly wrote from the time I was in grade school until just the last couple of years. One of the reasons why I write a lot of poetry is because a professor that I had gave me that advice that if I wanted to become more succinct in my writing, that I should first write my stories or thoughts in poetry and then write them in prose. And there's something to that when you have to tell a story in a few lines. Think about whether it's a song or a sonnet, which is a poem, kind of like a song. Right. You're trying to tell a whole story in just a very consolidated space. So it's a great exercise. Of course, I also wrote some poetry for my wife. That worked out pretty well. Yeah. So, that worked out well. We were married. We have children.
There we go.
But I haven't, I've never thought to put all the poetry together. I think you will be seeing some of my poems in the future, though, because in the tradition of the classic magazines for science fiction and fantasy, they included poetry. Oh, I should say that's something else that I do. Who I am is I'm also the curator for Tales from the Canyons of the Dam, which is a monthly magazine of short stories, and then we put out an omnibus every 6 months, 5 or 6 months. Mm-hmm. It's just a consolidation of all the stories from the before the last omnibus, I guess. And what we're going to start to do is put poems in each one. Samuel Peralta put a poem in the Halloween edition, and we had some great feedback from that. And there's going to be a poem from Sam in the next edition, which is a space-themed edition, and it's a different type of poem. But when these magazines first started, in order to save money, there was a lot of reprinting, and so they put in a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, a lot of Jules Verne. Those, the first amazing stories near 100 years ago, you'd get like one original story, a new story, and then it'd be something from Jules Verne, something from Poe. And that's helped to bring Poe to the forefront of our society. I'm sure you studied him in school, and I did. Mm-hmm. It's like in the mailbox in the United States and Canada. We're all fed The Raven, and we're all fed Annabelle Lee. And those all, because the publishers didn't have to pay for them, 60, 80 years after his death. They were right. All in the early science fiction and fantasy magazines. And I think that tradition of having poetry as part of science fiction and fantasy is something that we really want to hold on to. So you may see a poem from me in the future.
Now, do you have a favorite poet? I remember in high school we had to do a report on a poet, and so one that I've always liked and I did my report on was Langston Hughes.
Oh, Langston Hughes.
Do you have a favorite poet?
Yeah, I do have a favorite poet. My favorite poet is Walt Whitman. But then again, if you ask me another time, I might say something different. I had one of the things I've done in my life is I had a coffee shop / poetry house. If you can imagine, if you close your eyes and think about what that would be, you're probably correct. Like really dark, a lot of lamps, a lot of tapestries, some bead curtains, and it was a spoken word wasn't really a thing yet because this was in the 90s. It was just before spoken word became like a thing, and people would come up and they would go to the mic and either read their own poetry or read poetry from the classics or maybe the beats. I guess the beats are classics now too. And Walt Whitman is somebody that I kind of went back to again and again and again and again.
That's neat. So with your stories, I was trying to remember how I discovered you, and I think I won a giveaway somewhere, and I think it was Agroland that I won.
Yay, giveaways work.
Yep. But it's actually not the first thing that I read from you. I ended up buying your book, The Cathari Treasure. Is that how you say it, Cathari?
Yeah, The Cathari Treasure. That's correct. Yes.
So I would like to know, do you ever plan on going back and visiting and doing any more Cameron Concade novels besides the two that you have out? Yeah,
I have a couple outlined, and there was originally a plan to do at least 5 of them. And what ended up happening is the first book that I wrote for publication, The Potter's Daughter, it went through the rounds of the trade houses and then was sent back to me because I didn't have any sex in it or vulgarity. It's kind of I think they call it pedestrian realism is a genre or non-genre. It's like slice of life fiction.
Okay.
And it needed, and also because it was my first novel, it really needed an editor better than the person that had worked with me. And so I went ahead and put that up. And even though that was kind of the height, if you will, I think that was 2011, 2012, whatever that was, I just didn't sell a lot of that book because it wasn't a romance necessarily, even though there's a romance, and there was like no home for it. And so I decided that I would write. My youngest son was born. He's 6 now. So I guess 6 years ago. And so I decided I would write something a bit more of the thriller genre. Now, apart from watching thriller movies, I'm an avid reader, but I don't really read thriller. And The Cathari Treasure was kind of my take on, from the back of the cave in a shadow of what a thriller adventure should be. So that's why it's more of an adventure than, and I wrote that book. So my wife, she owns a business. She owns a flower shop in Manhattan, a couple of flower locations. And so she needed to work. So she had to sleep at night, and we were breastfeeding the child. So she would, when you have children, there's this process where the women extract the milk and put it in the bottles. And then dad can have intimate time with the child and feed the mother's milk. Right. Mm-hmm. And so because she had to sleep, I'd be up with the baby late into the night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Netflix, I think, had just come out where you had to put a disc in the PS3 to try to get that to work. That really wasn't a good thing to be doing yet. It wasn't quite there. So I decided to write Cathari Treasure with Cameron Concade, just how I thought these things could go. And I wrote that book with one hand holding a bottle in my son and the other hand typing on the laptop.
Oh, that's interesting.
And for better or worse, I think it shows. But it's one of my favorite books. And what ended up happening with that. Oh, and by the way, I did use, there's a lot of technique and things I do that I think the readers miss. And in that entire book, in that first edition, I didn't use the word it throughout the whole book, all 50,000 words. You never see the word it. You never see the word but, B-U-T. All the sentences were short sentences for quick reads. They were quick chapters. And that way it was a great success. And what ended up happening is I sent that out and I was advised to self-publish it. So I said, okay, I'll give that a shot. And it didn't sell at all in the United States, but it took off and was it was like in the top 10 of men's adventure, which has been removed as a genre, consolidated. But men's adventure was in the top 10 in the UK for a year. And I sold a lot of them.
Really?
Yeah. So that was actually my first hit. So if you look at the thing, it says, it was a bestseller over there. I sold a ton. And because I had written that, my wife's like, oh, you got to write another Cameron Concade. And so that's why I wrote Somali Deception, which I feel is a way, I did that more on purpose. So it's a stronger book, as a robust arc. That was actually, I was talking to St. Martin's Press, and they wanted to get into the serial thing that was taken off with the indies online. So they made some requirements that, you had to write 4 components at least, and each one had to have a beginning and an end. And then there had to be an overall arc, then of course, that pulled the 4 together. And so that's why I wrote that. But then when I sent that to the editor, he passed because, again, there wasn't enough sex and violence. It's kind of a trend there. I guess I need to work on sex and violence, I guess. I thought there was plenty of violence. From my position, I thought there was plenty of. I mean, it was almost disturbing to me because I wasn't super settled in writing either of those, the gunplay and that type of thing. But that book did okay in initial launch and then never really took off. Now, neither of those books. So by that time, I have 3 novels out, and none of them are doing well in the United States. And this is where I had to make a choice. People were saying, well, if you write more of the Cameron Concades, that you really need to get up to like 5 of them before they take off. And I really wasn't ready for the success of the Cathari Treasure. I didn't have a newsletter. I didn't have a web page set up. I didn't really have anything set up. I had 2 small children. I just really wasn't ready for that success. It came before I was really ready to do anything with it. And so I thought, well, what else could I write to kind of get me into the United States? And ironically, when I first started, the work that I'd written in the previously that hasn't been published yet, just stuff that I've written over the last number of years, was all speculative fiction, dark science fiction. But I've been advised by my friends in New York that work at publishing houses that science fiction doesn't sell. And so that's why I'd gone the other directions. But then what I was seeing was happening is that, in fact, science fiction was selling like hotcakes on Kindle. And, in comparison,
right.
To other things, right? So I said, well, I'm going to put Cameron on the shelf, because at the end of the Somali Deception, it says Cameron will return in, and then it has the name of the book. And so I put Cameron on the shelf, and I wrote a novel for the beginning of a new series that has yet to be released. And that was going to be, so the idea was I was going to get a new series going with science fiction, and then in tandem, I was going to write Cameron Concade. So what ended up happening with that is, before I finished the novel, and then I was invited to do some writing with some project. The Apocalypse Weird project was going on, if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's okay, fine, I'll put this on the shelf and I'll do this. And then that kind of just changed my course. So I still have yet, it isn't that I've given up on Cameron. It's just that with the time that I have to write, he just has never made it back in. So that's one of the projects. And that novel that I never released, that was, that's written. I'm now going through and editing it, and that will be released as part of the Dominion Rising set that involves Patrice Fitzgerald, Samuel Peralta, Gwyn Wright, P.K. Tyler, and then myself, and so many more. Ann Christie's in that. There's 22 authors. I'm remiss to name them all, so I apologize to any of them listening that I didn't say the names. But that's for that novel that's kind of been on my shelf since 2014 is going to come up. But now what I plan on doing when releasing that is writing another couple, so that when that comes out in August, we'll be able to follow it with another 1 or 2 right away.
Okay.
So we'll see.
That's funny. Why do you think the Cathari Treasure was such a big hit over in the UK, but not over here in the United States?
That's an excellent question. So the Cathari Treasure, you've read it, so you would know. And for our readers, Cathars, and Cathari is kind of an academic term, but people would usually probably say Cathars instead of Cathari, were a religious sect in Europe several hundred years ago. And they were a very pure sect, and the Catholic Church felt that they challenged their organization and infrastructure. I'm being very high level here, obviously. And so they wiped them out is what they did. And so there's a lot of good fiction about the Cathars. I believe the Cathars are mentioned in Dan Brown's books, the Da Vinci Code, it's that type of thing. The Cathars were really nice people, if you believe what you read about it, they were nice people, and that, they believed in more of a dualism than we do now in Christianity. It was more of an exact separate, like there's a good and there's a bad. And, you have to be aware of the bad, the Rex Mundi. And so in their dualism, they personified these things. But part of what they believe, which we still believe today, I'm at a loss of whether or not all sects of Christianity still have this, like Mormonism, but definitely even in the Catholic Church, is the idea of the Cathars is that, the blessing from Jesus is, he laid his hands upon the disciples, and then they laid their hands upon. So if you go to a Catholic church, in theory, that priest is ordained not just by Christ figuratively, but literally, like all the way back. And I'm not saying it's true or not true. I'm just saying that's the theological understanding, right? Mm-hmm, right. And so with the Cathars, they had their own twist on that. And so I should mention that part of my academic study was studying religious traditions. Mm-hmm. So that's how I had the backgrounds for this. Okay. And a couple of things happened when I wrote the Cathari Treasure. When I decided I was going to write a thriller, try to write something that's more marketable, is I had an office right across from the Chelsea Hotel to do my writing. It was a very short time. I had an office as a full-time writer. Then I had children, and my wife needed me to go back to take care of them. But the Chelsea Hotel, that's where Leonard Cohen wrote a lot of songs, and that's where the 2001 Space Odyssey was written. There's like a lot of science fiction out there, a lot of writers, a lot of poets. So it was fun to be writing across the street. And I found out that the man who had the office before me had written a book about the Cathar, one of the few book about the Cathar. And one of my professors in school had been writing a book about the Cathar and decided he wanted to be a painter instead. And that's a whole other thing. So there was all these like things coming at me like, oh, wow, I have all this information about the Cathar, and this is a sign that I probably should write about this. And that's where that took off. But the things I love about the book, and a theme that readers will find is without being too religious, if you will, because I guess it's just not cool to be religious, or you don't necessarily need to be religious to try to put out good messages. And you've read the Cathari Treasure. I mean, that's a big part of that, is that Cameron Concade is, he's not looking necessarily to be the good guy or the knight or anything great, but in active events that occur around him, he's the unsuspecting hero. He's the hero thrown into a situation, mm-hmm. and I think that's a great message to put out there,
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a great book. I think it's one of your most underrated books because you don't see many people talking about it.
It's actually still my most people still buy it, but nobody talks about it. I still sell a lot of Cathari Treasure. It's I got on a big tangent there about the Cathars. Your question directly was, why did it do better in Europe? I should say because the Europeans know who the Cathars are. Okay. that was a sum that was a whole long story about that. But most Americans see Cathari, they don't know, is that a spaceship? Is that they don't. It's not part of our tradition here. Mm-hmm. But all the readers that I spoke to in the UK or that I met, they know that. And I think if I ever get the book translated into French, it'll probably do pretty well.
Probably. Well, I guess now that we've talked about it, you want to give kind of a non-spoiler book blurb on what the Cathari Treasure is about for those that don't know?
Sure. The Cathari Treasure is the story of this chef in Manhattan who is a veteran of the French Foreign Legion. So he was in the military, and in his restaurant there's an occurrence, and he he goes out of his way to save some people, and it turns into they're evading people and seeking something out that takes them from New York to Boston to Montreal. I have to remember, it's a couple years ago. Down to Toronto, and then ultimately to Quebec. So it's in that formula of a novel, and then through this we learn about who he's saving and why he's saving. And of course, it's ultimately to protect the treasure, which, I'm not going to spoil that, but we find out what the treasure is at the end.
And as you said, you're kind of now known for your tales from the canyons of the damned. So I wanted to touch on that for a little bit. Where did your idea for Tales from the Canyons of the Damned come from?
So I mentioned I've been working on another novel that was shelved because I was invited to a project, Apocalypse Weird, with a lot of our friends were involved with that. It was being led by Michael Bunker and Nick Cole, and Hank Garner was in there, and Kim Wells, and just a lot of great people. It was one of the best writing group experiences I've ever had. Mm-hmm. And the novel took place that I wrote for that was in a shared universe of the Apocalypse Weird. And for our listeners, as I know you know, Preston, that each of the writers involved in that group was assigned a city or recruited because they could write about a city. And as I lived in Manhattan, Michael Bunker invited me to write about New York. And so I wrote a novel based on that. Now, Apocalypse Weird did not survive, and that novel was not published with Apocalypse Weird. So I had this novel, right, from this shared universe with a lot of fun, great things in it. And initially what it started was there was one standalone story that kind of came out of that, because I'd written the novel episodically as a bit of an homage to the style of Stephen King, where he has several things happening, at the beginning of his books, maybe in a town. And then they're all, the bad man comes to town or whatever. And then everybody handles it differently. And at some point they all come together or disposed of. Right. And then ultimately we have a hero. Right. So putting those together, one of the stories that I came up with was called The Tower. And it was really outside the novel. It was about a returning veteran, who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and he took a position. He gets offered a job in the Liberty Tower, the Freedom Tower, whatever they're calling it today. They keep changing the name of it for branding, but basically it's the new World Trade Center, right? Mm-hmm. The new. And while up there, an event occurs that's very Lovecraftian, and then so we kind of go through his experience there. And that's called Tower. That's one of the better selling short stories I had this year. That came from that first novel. And that character, Nate, is actually a tribute, and I say it at the beginning, to my cousin Nate, who was a high school student in Florida when the towers came down. And he saw the towers come down, and he signed up for the service, and he became a ranger, and he became a member of special operations. Special forces is what we call it, but it's, they're special operations force. And the real Nate actually served several tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, like the real deal. So I was very impressed with him doing that for his patriotism and as a human being. And I also looked at what he and other veterans experienced coming back to the United States of, things just don't wrap up that simply. You go through several tours and then you have new challenges. And so the Lovecraftian story of the Tower is a metaphor for what veterans face in overcoming things. I mean, extreme metaphor, right? It's you read the Tower. So it's a lot of hyperbole there. Extreme. So that was like one portion of it, and it did well. Well, then I had the whole rest of this novel from Apocalypse Weird and all these episodes, and I released a couple straight away, and I ended up getting a backlash from the readership because they were too short. So I'm releasing something that's 2,000 words, and Amazon has a requirement that there's a base price you charge, which is 99 cents. And so people said, hey, it's not worth it for 99 cents. And well, I think it is, Preston. I'll tell you that. However,
I do too.
However, I mean, it's $1, right? However, in listening to the readers, I said, well, how do we do this? There needs to be a way to publish. So I went back and I pulled those titles and I repackaged them with several of the stories together. And so I think off the top of my head, the first Tales from the Canyons of the Dam has 3 stories that were out of that novel. And the second one has 2, but then Bob Williams, other authors like, hey, this is kind of cool what you're doing. Can I play in the sandbox? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Why not? Because other authors have short stories that are too short maybe to go on their own. Right. And so then he put one in and then we kind of sat for a while. And then I was hearing from like a lot of other authors and they said, you really should put this out. And they sent me a ton of stories. I started releasing them like once a month then. And right now, I mean, we're scheduled through next year. I mean, like a year from now there are slots and I'll announce when slots are available, but I already have stories for the Halloween edition next year that couldn't fit this year.
Oh, wow.
We have space stories coming up for the next 3 editions. And all up until the Halloween edition, I had a story in there in every edition that goes back to the first novel I created with Apocalypse Weird, which I may or may not, with my schedule being what it is, pull all those stories together and release that novel at some point as a novel. Or I may not. That became the birth of the Canyons. So Tales from the Canyons was one of those creatures that I started to fix something that was broken, and it took on a life of its own. And we have a special little secret Canyon Peeps group that's, we try to steer it towards helping each other become better writers. We have discussion on there about writing and gender. We have discussion on there of using different tropes, when to use them, when not to use them. We all have a love of pulp or dark science fiction and fantasy, and you see it a lot now with with Netflix series Stranger Things and Black Mirror. I don't know if you've watched those.
I've halfway through Stranger Things. I haven't watched Black Mirror though. Black
Mirror is a bit rough. I mean, it's a bit darker, but it's still in the idea of this dark science fiction. I didn't mean for it to go so much toward horror, but it's kind of gone in that gone in that direction. But that's okay. Things are organic, and that's what I was saying is it has a life of its own. So what we're doing, just to kind of shake it up a little bit, is that the December issue, the January issue, and the March issue are all going to be space stories.
Okay.
And I may change the name a little bit, but they'll still be part of the Canyon series. I mean, you'll be able to find them. And so then, I'm looking to reach other readers who, stay kind of at that end of the spectrum. They may not want to come over to the more Lovecraftian. So we're going to show people that we're not one-trick ponies.
Right.
And you've read some of the stories. I mean, they aren't all just like horror stories. There's some very
no, they're not
interesting range. And so we need to make sure that with the brand that we're letting people know that we're doing different things. But then those space stories will again be put together in a special omnibus. That'll be a space omnibus. And, yeah, it's going to be really great.
That is awesome.
We worked with some people that have been on your show, Ernie Howard, and as I said, Bob Williams, and then Will Swardstrom, Sam Peralta, who I mentioned already, Kevin Lauderdale, Michael Hicks has been a contributor. I mean, it goes on and on. Jessica West is the editor for that series. And she does an amazing job helping us put things together and staying very positive.
She's written for it too, hasn't she?
She has contributed a story, and she has another story coming out in the spring because that's the thing. I really don't want to have to put these out every week because we aren't just, it's for your listeners so they know this isn't just something that writers are putting together. This is like a real business that I have, and we pay authors. And so if an author's listening and they have a short story that they feel fits in the Canyons, they feel free to submit. But we pay 3 cents a word, capping at $150 and $150, that is, because we're trying to steer the stories to be short reads. And I mean, it's just more viable as a business to put these out once a month than it is to put them out every week, right?
Yeah. So you said you have the space one coming up. Do you see this turning into something kind of like the Future Chronicles, where you might explore, what do I want to say, different topics or different, like you've got the Doomsday, you've got AI Chronicles, robot. Do you see Tales from the Canyons of the Damned exploring different things like that?
Not in the same way. Future Chronicles is different.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
From Canyons. I put out an anthology. I curated an anthology in the spring called Clones, the Anthology. Mm-hmm. And that's more of like a Future Chronicles type of work. It has, it's invite only, number one. Mm-hmm. You're seeking out a certain type of writing, or I should say types, because like with that type of like with Future Chronicles and with Clones, you want to make sure there's a wide variety. You don't want to have a lot of the same story. It's far more controlled and on purpose. And then you're also getting a lot more stories. I mean, I think I had 10 and 11 stories in the Clones. Mm-hmm. And then we have, Future Chronicles usually runs around the same thing, 10 to 12, mm-hmm. right in there. Sam usually gets, or the people that work with him. Mm-hmm. But that's, those are almost always invite only. I'm working on another one right now called B Movie with Artie Cabrera and Sam. And that, again, invite only. So that's a very different thing. So with the Canyons, I mean, everybody is free to submit. We've had first time authors or authors that have only written a few things. Ian Garner submitted a great story for the edition number 7 mm-hmm. about these Hexen wolves. Just, and it's kind of, it's tongue in cheek. It's a little bit pulpy. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be mm-hmm. fun. Some of the stuff though is very high level. We've had Michael Hicks, who's also in Clones and also in the Future Chronicles. He's written a story. I mean, Samuel's poetry is certainly top of the line. I mean, I don't want to say that the Canyons are a B level, but they're a lot more loose as far as we're going to look at everybody. You don't have to wait for an invitation. Now, as far as the themes, then what'll happen is the way I end up with space is there actually have been a couple space stories, at least one off the top of my head, that were in the first few editions. But this summer, I ended up with a deluge of interest in space stories, right? Mm-hmm. So I had a bunch of editions at once. I thought, what do I do with this? Right. I was like, so maybe I should create a special space book. And I didn't know if I was going to create I really don't want to run a whole separate series because that might be a little bit demanding on my time from my other projects. And I thought, well, I need to find a way. It took me a few months to figure out how to incorporate it into the Canyon series. And then once I said, I got a few, I thought it would just be like 1 or 2 issues. And then, of course, more people submitted space stories. So that's why we're going to have 3 issues. And I might have a few slots left, if anybody's listening to this, to put a couple in the March edition. Because what's ended up happening is a few of our writers, even though I say keep it short, get very excited and they submit something that's 12,000 words long. And it's like, okay, I'd love to use that, but the cap on the Canyons is around 20,000 words tops. And that's what makes it viable. That's what makes it a quick read, a nice edition and affordable. Right. Mm-hmm, right. And we don't want just one story in there. We want to have a couple to mix it up. But if I ended up with a whole lot of robot stories, I would do them. Okay. I know Tony Meek, A.K. Meek, Tony Meek is putting something together or working on something that's involving robot stories. And he's contributed a few for Canyons, but he's doing his own anthology. I'm curious to see that. But yeah, if a bunch of people put stuff in. Another thing I'm thinking about outside of the Canyons is doing another Clones type anthology. And again, I don't want to just mirror some of the great work that's already been done or that I've been part of or our friends have been part of. I mean, I think Sam has a really healthy, he's like 20 books in or something like that. It's like crazy. Sam has a lot. Yeah, like he's doing part 2. He's going back to the well for a couple of these now. So I'd like to come up with some themes that are farther out there. So, Space the Anthology is easy enough to do. I'm sure people do that, but there's a lot of space anthologies. One of the ones that I've been tossed around is Oceans, the Anthology.
Okay.
Just have some high level stories about, the oceans. And again, for that type of thing, it'd be great to see people writing about, maybe something to do with climate change, or maybe something to do with population, or maybe something to do with exploring, or maybe just an Atlantis. There's a whole ocean deep of ideas that could be put into that type of anthology that's untapped. You just don't see a lot of those.
Because of Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, have there been authors that you might not have discovered if you hadn't done Tales from the Canyons of the Damned?
Oh, yes. So one of them is, I'll do a shout out. Jason Lavelle he's a great author, and I encourage you to look up his books. Mm-hmm. He hasn't been printed yet or published yet in Tales because he's in queue. As I mentioned, we have a long queue already. But he's on the roster. He's part of the group. He's stimulating us all with his ideas. He lives up in Michigan, where I'm from, and yeah, he'll be showing up, I want to say in April, with an amazing story. But there's somebody that I never knew before starting this. And then there's other authors I've had a chance to work closely with that I had never worked with before. Tony Meek is one. We did a couple stories together, and it's Jason Anspach. It's another author. Like, he had joined Apocalypse Weird near the end, and we knew each other online as Facebook friends. But he put in a reprint of Ledgetown, which is a great story if you haven't read it. Obviously, I'm going to recommend every one of these stories, but it is a great story, and so that was great to get to know him better. He's a very, very kind person, and like every one of these writers is a stellar writer. Yeah, it's still going on. People are putting stuff in. Maybe after this podcast, I'll get a chance to meet some new writers.
Yeah, that would be pretty neat. Well, here at the Legendarian, we kind of like to end each episode on a segment that we call the Legendary Ending. And some of these questions aren't necessarily writing related, but I'm going to ask you some fan questions that were asked online in these. So the first one comes from Kevin Lauderdale. He says, ask you about how you got into editing. He says, I bet it had something to do with his time spent in Tibet mastering the mystic arts. Oh,
Kevin, I love you, brother. So Kevin's a humorist. He has a story coming out in the next edition that's you're going to love. I don't know how to answer. So the guys tease me a lot because when I was younger, like I said, I have been on my own since I was early teens, around 12 years old. So I've had a lot of experiences. I hitchhiked across the country when I was around 18, and then, I've traveled to over 22 countries and over 300 cities, and I've done a lot of things. So what'll happen is, and I don't mean to do this, but a topic will come up and I'll just answer it, and then they tend to tease me. That's what happened. It's like, you asked, and I said, I've been there. I just,
that's right.
And the thing that's really funny about this, I should mention, is all that traveling I did and all that, all that was pretty much before I had children. Like, since I've had children in the last 9 years, I haven't done a whole lot of anything. So I'm a normal guy like anybody else, but there was a period of 25 years where I was out in the world.
That's funny. The next one comes from Real Swardstrom. He says, what is Daniel Smith's favorite story about snowblowers?
Oh, man, hands down, the story about the melding of the snowblower and the human being. Lower by Will Swardstrom.
Sounds good.
I have to tell you, that's the other thing that happens in the Canyons group, is because it's an avenue to put out short stories, not quite flash fiction, but it could, Mm-hmm. It really opens up the creativity. It gives these authors, these friends of ours, the freedom to work on ideas that they probably wouldn't choose to if they had to stick with a certain length requirement that it takes, for indie publishing, or, maybe to be more commercial, if you will. And so, Will has shared with me, he most likely never would have written Blower at all if it wasn't for, having a place to put it for people to read it. And that story, I don't know if you've read Blower, but it's gotten some great feedback and people like it. And so it works. The recipe works.
I really liked his story that he did, Bob for President.
Oh my gosh. That
is hilarious.
That was the best. I love that story. That was Unnatural Born Alien. Mm-hmm. And that story is in the 3rd edition, or in the first omnibus, if you pick up the omnibus. And it's one of the humor stories in Canes, because they aren't all hardcore scary or fantastic. It was actually a satire piece. And it's about an alien that's running for, because technically he can run because he was born in the United States, but he's an alien. And he goes through, and there's a little bit of mix of things that were going on in all the campaigns at the time it was written, because it was written last winter. And there were a lot more people in the playing field, and we didn't know how things would turn out. I love the story. I think, again, everybody should read it. It's a good laugh. Something I found to be very, very ironic, or very telltale about how people take things, is some of the reviews responded in a way. I'm not going to out Will. You can ask him yourself, but Will has his political views, and that's fine. He's free to them. But you see a reviewer accuse him of something that's so contrary of Will Swardstrom. This piece is an example of da 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 da, and I'm like, you just don't know Will. I mean, this is totally, I mean, you and Will would probably be best buddies with your ideas, and it's, so it is funny how people see things and they judge a book by its cover, mm-hmm. and to say whether or not it's conservative or liberal or in between or whatever.
And the funny thing is he takes, stuff from both sides. Left and right.
It's not partisan at all. It's a satirical joke. It's not partisan. He doesn't pick on anybody. It's just funny. If anything satirical, it's a satire of that part of the process of our system, which was, again, like last winter. So I'm not even sure if we're at the primaries yet, so it was like just an example of kind of the nonsensical happenings across the board. And, there's a show on television called The Circus that was like another view, a journalistic view saying the same thing. They call it a circus because it's just crazy. And it wasn't partisan, but I did find it ironic that there were some readers, I question if they were readers, maybe they just jumped on it, that, well, I don't know. But they decided to make it an, assumption. I mean, I don't know. It's funny how these things go, but we've seen it time and time again this year during election season, and we've seen it in the past during election season. I think it's a little tragic, actually. I think it's a great story. I think, no matter what your position is, if you read it, you'll have a laugh.
Everybody definitely needs to read it. Definitely.
I'll go ahead and say something else about Will Swardstrom, because he is a good friend of mine, and he contributes frequently to the Canyons, and he's been a great supporter. But the guy is an excellent author. He's he's an academic, so it's kind of in his blood, I guess, to know how to write. And he's a father, so you definitely see that in there. But any of the stories that he's written, you can search for better quality. You're not going to find it. He's top notch.
Yeah, he really is. So the next question comes from Ernie Howard, and he says, ask Daniel what the meaning of life is. That guy will know, believe me.
Oh, is that what Ernie says? See, this is where they're teasing me again. I hate to break it to him, but there is no meaning to life. That's from what I found from traveling the vast universe and having friends of every different idea and belief. The waves roll in and the waves roll out, man. And you can make a choice. You can get depressed about it and get sad and give up. You can decide that if it doesn't matter, you can be mean and nasty to people, or you can just be righteous. And I choose to be righteous. You know, I don't think there's a meaning. There doesn't have to be a meaning. I think that you derive the meaning yourself, and it comes out of how you choose to live your life and how we treat each other.
What songs are currently on your writing playlist?
Oh, so I'm one of the I play music when I'm writing, but I can't listen to lyrics.
Okay.
So because if I hear the lyrics, I've actually typed the lyrics to songs. Just I type the next line, So depending on what I'm writing, and sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's real easy. So I might play some classical music. This morning, even while I was editing, I was listening to Adagios by Mozart. So it was like all of his Adagios because I was just wanted to keep focused and on a rhythm. If I'm writing adventure scenes, one of the things I love to put on is on YouTube, they have epic music. I think it's music from like video games and the type. It's like very digital and intense. And so I'll put that on, and those things run like for 2 hours. And especially if you're writing an action, my chest gets tight and my hands are just flying and the music is intense. I listen to a lot of that. And I recommend just Google, or not Google, go to YouTube and search for epic music, and you'll see like 3 or 4 things show up, and you listen to that and you're like, wow.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. Yeah. If you had if you had a time machine, where would you travel and why?
A time machine, where would I travel? Well, I think I do have a time machine. I wrote a story for Sam, and it came out, The Diatomic Quantum Flop. Mm-hmm. And, one of the great enlightenment of the Dalai Lama is the Kali Chakra. And the Kali Chakra has to do with, essentially it ties into the B theory of time. And so the B theory of time is that the past and the present and the future actually all exist in one place, and we're just experiencing it in a linear fashion. Mm-hmm. So with enough preparedness and meditation, you can reach a point where you can pull yourself out and insert yourself into different points. And that's why the Dalai Lama, they say when he meets you, even if you're a really nice guy, when you meet him, he'll know if you're a bad guy because he can see when you were bad. Or if you're a bad guy, when he meets you, he'll know that maybe you're a really good guy because he can see that you were good, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of thing. So I would like to have the discipline to access that. And what I want to see, I'd like to see the future. I'm very curious to see how my children grow up. And I had children late. I had children when I turned 40. And so there's a good chance that even if I have a robust life, that, I might not make it that far. So I'd like to go farther and see how they do.
If you had one superpower, what would it be and why?
What superpower?
Yeah,
I'll tell you, that's an easy one for me. I would like retention. I used to pride myself in my brain. I had a keychain at one time that says, of all the things I lost, I miss my mind the most. And that's, we all experience it, where something's on the tip of the tongue or, on the back of your head. But I do find as we all do, as we get older, that stuff just isn't at your fingertips like it used to be, And so I'd like to be able to access all that. When I was around 8 years old, where I was living, there was like 20 million feet of snow. It was up in northern Michigan, and so I had the encyclopedia was the only thing to read. So I read the entire encyclopedia set, and so for a long time I was able to go back and just access that stuff. That's one of the reasons why I excelled through school. But now I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
Right.
It's crazy. I love that superpower. Just to be able to know. You could ask me a question, I'd just be like, bam. Above all else, my heroes are those that pursue knowledge.
Yeah. And so the question that we're famous for here, a penguin walks through the door right now wearing a sombrero. What does he say and why is he here?
I think I answered that once before for you, didn't I?
You have, on the written interview.
Oh, man. I like consistency. Do you know what I said?
Last time you said, can you believe that Russell Blake, wow, what won't he do for a belly shot?
Yeah, same thing. Same thing. That guy's nuts. Or at least he wants us to believe he's nuts. I haven't been down to Mexico in a lot of years. But I have some friends that have a little hotel kind of mom and pop place near him. I need to get down there and look him up. It sounds like he's good for some tequila and belly shots and a good time.
And before we leave, do you have any advice, whether it be for writing or for life, that you would like to share with the listeners?
Well, for writing, it's life is something you should figure out on your own. But for writing, stick to it. Writing is enjoyable. I find that a lot of times my greatest joy of writing are right in the midst of it or near the end when that euphoric sense of completion. And so my advice for people is it's going to be hard. Sometimes it's hard to sit down. It's hard to push through, but everything is in increments, and if you can, don't worry about, we see like the NaNoWriMo, which is a great thing. And it's wonderful. I'm glad that people get involved, but I do see people getting depressed. Oh, I can't do 1,700 words a day or 1,200 words a day or even 500 words a day. Well, if you can only do 200 words every time you sit down, or if you want to, a trick I do is I message myself. I used to send emails, and then I realized I had the text message, and I could text message myself, and it's so much quicker. And so just text yourself, your ideas, and then get them on paper, because 200 words will turn into 400, will turn into 6, 8, 10. Those increments build up, and you can't edit a blank page, man. You need those words. So keep at it, stick at it, and Preston, I'll say that to you, man. Stick at it. I know you've done some writing. Keep it up. Yeah, keep it up, brother.
Will do. And where can our listeners go if they would like to learn more about you or your stories?
They can go to danielarthurSmith.com, and then very shortly, it isn't published yet, there will be a website for the Canyons of the Dam that they can learn about on my website. And they can, of course, find me on Amazon, where my work is all but like one title, I think, is exclusive to Amazon, and Daniel Arthur Smith, and they'll find a author page there.
Sounds good. Well, we'll throw links to all those in the show notes over at legendarium.com. Thank you for taking time out of your day and doing 30-minute author interviews with us.
Thanks, Preston.
Well, guys, that's all the time we've got for this episode. Thank you for tuning in to 30-minute author interviews. Head on over to legendarium.com and check out the show notes for the episode. Daniel Arthur Smith has a giveaway that's running until Tuesday, January 3rd, 2017. With that being said, this is the last episode of 2016. Thank you so much for supporting the 30-minute author interview podcast. I appreciate it. I look forward to 2017 and all the amazing interviews that I'll get to bring you. Until next time, guys, have a good one and have a legendary new year. Woo! Nailed it!